So, you want to know about the Nords. And I mean, really know about them. Not just the surface level stuff about how they like mead and punching things, but the whole story. How they went from refugees fleeing a frozen continent to building one of the most powerful empires in Tamriel's history. How their culture shaped the entire political landscape of the Elder Scrolls world. How they evolved across every game in the series. Today, we're going deep. This is the full story of the Nords, from the Merethic era all the way to the events of Skyrim. We're talking origins, gods, wars, heroes, and how Bethesda has portrayed them across decades of games. Let's start at the beginning. The Nords come from Atmora, a continent way up north of Tamriel. Like, really far north. The name Atmora actually means Elder Wood in Aldmeris, though some sources call it the Land of Truth in Atmoran texts. Picture a land that was once teeming with life, but gradually froze over in an event called the Frostfall that turned the whole continent into permanent winter. The people living there were called Atmorans, and they are the ancestors of not just the Nords, but potentially all Nordic peoples, which includes Imperials and Bretons too. These weren't the sophisticated empire builders we see later. They were pre-literate, meaning they had no formal writing system. They organized themselves around animal worship, venerating creatures like hawks, wolves, snakes, moths, owls, whales, bears, and foxes. But above all these animals, they worshipped dragons. Now, here's where it gets interesting. According to Nordic beliefs, humans were formed when the sky breathed onto the land at the throat of the world, the highest mountain in all of Tamriel. They called themselves the children of the sky because of this origin story. The goddess Kine, who's like the Nordic version of Kinnereth, is considered their mother. This breathing, this connection to the sky and wind, becomes hugely important later when we talk about the Thuum. The Atmorans weren't all living peacefully in their frozen homeland. There was constant warfare happening up there. Different sources describe them as being engaged in ceaseless warfare among themselves. Eventually, some groups decided to head south, crossing the Sea of Ghosts to land on Tamriel's northern shores at a place called Sharik Head. This migration didn't happen all at once. It was wave after wave of people over many years fleeing civil war and seeking better lands. The first major settlement they built was Sarthal, in the area that would become Winterhold. This wasn't just some small village. Sarthal grew into a massive city, the first capital of what would become Skyrim, and the first city of men on the entire continent of Tamriel. For a while, things were actually peaceful. The Atmorans coexisted with the Snow Elves, who the Atmorans called Falmer, who were already living in Skyrim. The Snow Elves had an incredibly advanced civilization that rivaled even the Ultimar of the Somerset Isles. They had magic, architecture, culture. The early Atmorans and Snow Elves traded, kept to their own territories, and generally left each other alone. Then came the Night of Tears, and everything went sideways. One night, without warning, Snow Elf forces descended on Sarthal and massacred almost everyone. They burned the city to the ground, killed men, women, and children. The whole thing became known as the Crying Night. Why did they do it? That's been debated for ages. The official Nord version says the Snow Elves were jealous of how fast the human population was growing and wanted to wipe them out before they became a threat. Some Imperial scholars think the Snow Elves feared Nordic culture would surpass their own. But there's another theory, and this one's got some weight to it. When you explore Sarthal's ruins in Skyrim, you find something called the Eye of Magnus, this incredibly powerful magical artifact buried under the city. Some scholars believe the Snow Elves knew about this artifact and attacked Sarthal specifically to claim it for themselves. The attack was too focused, too precise to just be about wiping out humans. They knew the layout of the city, targeted specific locations. It looked like they had a singular goal. There's even a weirder theory involving the Daedric prince Mehrunes Dagon, claiming he gave the Snow Elves terrible dreams that drove them to attack. But that's getting into really obscure Nordic Breton mythology. Whatever the reason, only 3 people survived: Ysgramor and his 2 sons, Ingol and Ilgar. They fled back to Atmora with tales of elvish betrayal and slaughter. This single event would shape the entire future of both races. When Ysgramor returned to Atmora, he found that the civil war had ended. Perfect timing. He gathered warriors with stories of the massacre, about how the elves had murdered their kinsmen while they slept. Soon, he had an entire army ready to sail south for revenge. These warriors became known as the 500 Companions. Though, like many legendary numbers, it might not have been exactly 500. The 500 are interesting because they weren't just one unified force. They organized themselves into longship crews, each led by a captain, with Ysgramor as the overall harbinger. Different crews had different goals, different loyalties, but they all answered to Ysgramor when he called. On a day known as the Day of Final Passage, the fleet set sail from the massive shipyards of Jilkurfik in Atmora. Ysgramor commanded a longboat called Ilgermet. His sons had their own ships too, Harak and Darumzu. The crossing was rough. A massive storm, called the Storm of Separation, hid the fleet. Ingol was lost in the storm, and his crew never made it to Skyrim. Only his younger brother Ilgar survived to land with Ysgramor. Before they even reached Sarthal, something important happened. A man approached them, calling himself Ahzidal. He was another survivor of the Night of Tears, who had spent the intervening years traveling Tamriel, studying every kind of magic he could find to get revenge on the elves. He offered to share his knowledge with Ysgramor and the 500, enchanting all their steel weapons with powerful magic. And steel itself was significant. The Atmorans had learned metallurgy, and steel weapons gave them a huge advantage over the snow elves in direct combat. What followed wasn't just a war, it was genocide. The Atmorans reclaimed Sarthal, then assembled what they called the Circle of Captains. They decided that every captain and crew should go their own way, spreading across Tamriel to hunt down elves wherever they could find them. This period became known as the Return. The 500 companions spread from the mountains of Skyrim all the way to the southern marshes of Black Marsh and even to the island of Solstheim. Everywhere they went, they slaughtered snow elves by the thousands. They fashioned elf ears into necklaces. They burned entire settlements. Their descendants would later glorify these massacres in songs like The Slaying of the Snow Prince. The snow elves tried to fight back. They were powerful mages, they had greater numbers initially, they had magical knowledge the Atmorans couldn't match, but the Nords were relentless. They were bigger, stronger, and driven by rage over the Night of Tears. The snow elves kept losing ground. Eventually, the surviving snow elves were pushed all the way to Solstheim, where they made their final stand at the Battle of Mosring. There, a legendary figure called the Snow Prince fell in battle. The Nords respected his valor so much that they buried him with full honors in a freshly dug barrow, complete with treasure and guards. With the Snow Prince dead, organized snow elf resistance collapsed. The remaining snow elves had nowhere to go. Some fled underground to seek help from their distant cousins, the Dwemer. The Dwemer agreed to shelter them, but there was a catch. The snow elves had to eat a toxic fungus that rendered them permanently blind. Whether this was an intentional betrayal or a condition the snow elves agreed to out of desperation is debated. Either way, the snow elves became slaves to the Dwemer. Over generations, living underground without sight, the snow elves changed. They became the Falmer, the twisted, bestial creatures you fight in Skyrim's dungeons. They lost their language, their culture, their history. When the Dwemer mysteriously disappeared in the First Era, the Falmer were left to roam the underground ruins, completely feral. Only tiny pockets of uncorrupted snow elves survived, like Knight Paladin Gelibor at the Chantry of Oriel, who calls his corrupted brethren the Betrayed and refuses to use the name Falmer for himself. Meanwhile, Ysgramor and the remaining companions were establishing the Nordic presence in Skyrim. Ysgramor built Windhelm near where he buried his son, Ingol. The city was constructed by elven slaves in Atmoran architectural style, built to be an impenetrable fortress. He ordered a great bridge built over the White River so that no elf could sneak across to get revenge. When Ysgramor finally died, Supposedly, his last breath coalesced into a great storm that swept across Tamriel, causing all his warriors to lay down their weapons in grief. With their leader gone and their vengeance complete, most of the 500 companions stopped their conquests and settled down to become farmers and city builders. One particularly important captain was Jeek of the River, who commanded the longboat Jorvaskr. Jeek and his crew broke off from the main group early to explore Skyrim's wilderness. They discovered the Skyforge, an ancient forge of unknown origin that predated even the elves. The elves had avoided it because it was known to drive a magic almost as old as Nirn itself. Jeek's crew built a great mead hall named Jorvaskr right on that spot, and that became the foundation for the city of Whiterun. These early Nord settlements formed the basis of what would become the first empire of the Nords, also called the Nord Empire. Under High King Harald in the early First Era, Skyrim was consolidated as an independent kingdom. Harald was a direct descendant of Ysgramor, and he's the one who really unified the various Nordholds into a cohesive nation. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we can understand how the Nord Empire formed, we need to talk about dragons. Remember how I said the Atmorans worshipped dragons? That continued when they came to Skyrim. Dragons actually ruled over humans during the late Merethic era through something called the dragon cult. The dragons saw themselves as gods, and they had human priests called dragon priests who ruled in their name. These priests had as much power as kings, sometimes more. The dragon lord Alduin, who called himself the World Eater and claimed to be a god, led all the other dragons. The relationship between humans and dragons was basically slavery. Humans built temples to honor the dragons, served them, worshipped them, and the dragons expected complete obedience. The dragon priests themselves were powerful mages who could also use the Thuum, the dragon language used as magic. Eventually, people got tired of being oppressed. The Nords tried to rebel, but they were defeated. Then something changed. Kain, the Nordic goddess of storms, took pity on her children. She asked Parturnax, who was Alduin's own brother, to teach humans how to use the Thuum so they could fight back on equal terms. Parturnax agreed. He taught the ancient Nords the way of the voice, showing them how to use their own breath and shouts as weapons. The Nords who learned the Thuum became known as tongues, and they were absolutely terrifying. 3 of the greatest tongues, Hakon One-Eye, Felder the Old, and Gormlaith Goldenhilt, created a special shout called Dragon Rent, specifically designed to combat dragons. It forced dragons to understand mortality, making them temporarily vulnerable. They used this shout, combined with an Elder Scroll, to banish Alduin through time, which effectively ended the Dragon War. With the dragons defeated and scattered, human civilization could actually develop. The Thuum became part of Nordic culture, but after centuries of war and dragon worship, the Nords came to see it differently. Here's where things get philosophical. After generations of using the Thuum as a weapon, conquering with it, the Nords started questioning whether that was right. A really important figure named Jurgen Windcaller came along and changed everything. Jurgen had been one of the great tongues, a powerful warrior who used the voice in battle. But after the Nordic army suffered a major defeat against the Dark Elves at Red Mountain, Jurgen went into seclusion. He came out years later completely transformed, preaching pacifism and a new philosophy called the Way of the Voice. The Way of the Voice taught that the Thuum was a gift from Kain for worship and meditation, not for warfare. Jurgen founded the Greybeards, an order of monks who secluded themselves at High Hrothgar on the throat of the world to study and meditate on the voice. The Greybeards became incredibly powerful but rarely spoke, as even their normal voices could cause destruction if they weren't careful. This philosophy spread through Nordic society. The ancient tongues, who had been war chiefs, gradually disappeared. By the time we get to Skyrim in the 4th era, almost nobody uses the Thuum for combat anymore. It's become a sacred, meditative practice. The most powerful tongues had to be gagged when they weren't practicing because their voices were so dangerous. Only Dragonborn, individuals born with the soul of a dragon, could learn shouts instantly by absorbing dragon souls, rather than spending years in meditation. Everyone else needed decades of study to learn even a single word of power. Okay, so the dragons are gone, the Nords have settled in Skyrim, they've built cities. What's next? Conquest? Obviously. This is where we get into the first empire of the Nords, one of the most aggressive expansion periods in Tamriel's history. Around the year 240 of the First Era, King Vrage, the Gifted, started a massive campaign of expansion. Vrage believed that all of Tamriel belonged to the Nords by right. Some attribute his success to Sai, the god of luck, but really it was just good old Nordic aggression and military might. Within about 50 years, the Nords conquered most of northern Tamriel. They took large chunks of High Rock, they invaded and occupied most of Morrowind except for the Dwemer kingdom of Vardenfell. They pushed into Cyrodiil's Nibene Valley. At its height, the First Empire controlled huge swaths of territory. The military leaders during this period were legendary. Derek the Tall, Yorick Helmbulk, Hogue Merkiller, these were all tongues, powerful warriors who used the voice in battle. The Thuum hadn't completely become pacifist yet. These war chiefs were demon chieftains to their enemies, heroes to the Nords. But empires are hard to maintain, especially one built purely on military conquest. The First Empire lasted less than 200 years. Internal divisions, the difficulty of controlling such vast territory, rebellions from conquered peoples, it all added up. The empire gradually contracted back to Skyrim itself. The defeat at Red Mountain was particularly significant. The Nords marched against the Dark Elves of Morrowind, confident in their military might. But the Dunmer had the Tribunal, 3 living gods who had achieved immortality. The Nordic army was utterly destroyed. This defeat shook Nordic confidence and contributed to Jurgen Windcaller's crisis of faith that led to the Way of the Voice. After the First Empire collapsed, Skyrim remained a powerful kingdom but stopped trying to conquer its neighbors. The Nords mostly kept to themselves for a few centuries. Then came the Akaviri invasion in the late First Era. The Akaviri were a mysterious people from a continent east of Tamriel. They cut through Skyrim like a hot knife through butter. The Nords couldn't stop them. The Akaviri Dragon Guard only halted when they reached Cyrodiil, and the united armies of the Empire defeated them at the Battle of Pale Pass. The Nords were impressed. For the first time, the whole of Skyrim pledged allegiance to one person, Riemann Cyrodiil, a dragonborn who founded the Second Empire. The Nords supported this empire for hundreds of years, even after the Reman dynasty ended and Cyrodiil was ruled by potentates. This period is important because it shows how Nordic culture began integrating with Imperial culture. The isolation of the First Empire period gave way to being part of a larger, multicultural empire. Nords served in the Imperial Legion, traded throughout Tamriel, and gradually adopted some Imperial customs while maintaining their distinct identity. Now we get to probably the most important Nord in all of history, Tiber Septim, also known as Talos. His story is complicated and wrapped in myth, but here's what we know. According to the Orthodox version, he was born on Atmora with the name Talos, meaning Storm Crown. He spent his early life in Skyrim among Nords, learning the Thuum from the remaining tongues. As a young man, he became a general under King Cuthlecain of Cyrodiil. There is a heretical version of events from the Arcturian heresy that says he was actually born Hjalti Earlybeard on the island of Alcair in High Rock, and that he assassinated Cuthlecain himself. But most people in the Empire don't believe that version. Either way, what's certain is that Talos was a dragonborn with the ability to use the Thuum. At the age of 20, he led the invasion of Old Hroldan. He met the combined armies of Skyrim and High Rock at a fort called Senkret Tor and defeated them. When the Nordic army saw him use the Thuum and recognized him as dragonborn, they joined him instead of fighting him. They saw in him the blood of dragons and the heir to the empires of men. Talos and Cuthlecain marched east and conquered the Imperial city in the year 854 of the Second Era. Days after Cuthlecain was crowned emperor, a Breton Nightblade assassinated him and slit Talos' throat, burning the palace in the process. Talos survived but could no longer shout. He could only whisper. So he took the name Tiber Septim and began leading his armies with a whisper instead of a shout. Over the next years, Tiber Septim conquered all of Tamriel. He used a combination of military genius, the Numidium, a massive Dwemer golem, and political maneuvering. He married Berenzaya of Morrowind, had an affair that she terminated, created alliances, crushed enemies. Eventually, he stood as the undisputed ruler of a unified Tamriel. In year 854 of the Second Era, he declared the end of the Second Era and the beginning of the Third. The Third Empire, also called the Septim Empire, began. Tiber Septim became the first emperor of this new age. When he died, something remarkable happened. Tiber Septim ascended to godhood, becoming Talos, the ninth divine. This is huge, because mortals almost never become gods in the Elder Scrolls universe. The 8 divines became the 9. To the Imperials, Talos was the god of war and governance. To the Nords, he was the god of might and honor, the ultimate symbol of what a Nord could achieve. Nord culture, more than just warriors. Before we continue with the history, let's talk about what Nordic culture actually looks like day to day, because there's a lot more to it than just fighting. The Nords are stereotyped as meat-swilling barbarians who solve everything with violence, and while there's some truth to that, it misses a lot. Nordic culture is actually pretty rich and complex. Mead and drinking culture. Yes, Nords love mead. It's made from fermented honey and water, sometimes with molasses or grain mash, mixed with various spices and fruits. Every meadery has its own secret recipes, and Nords will absolutely get into fistfights over which brewmaster is best. Mead is called the nectar of shore by Nord hunters. It's so important to their culture that communities literally formed around mead halls, which led to the founding of settlements like Whiterun. Even in Sovngarde, the Nordic afterlife, the Hall of Valor is basically a giant mead hall where the drink flows freely. Funny enough, pockets in men's clothing were invented by Nords so they could carry hip flasks of mead without pickpockets stealing them. But drinking culture among Nords is about more than just getting drunk. It's a test of endurance. Being able to drink more mead than anyone else is considered as impressive as surviving a blizzard or killing a bear. Nords respect those who can endure adversity, and drinking contests are one way to prove that. If you're ever in a room full of drunk Nords, here are the rules. Don't talk about politics. Don't argue about who's the best brewmaster. Don't argue about who punches hardest. And never ask why someone just punched you. Just take the punch and move on. Refusing a drink is seen as admitting weakness. It's a good way to alienate yourself from Nord society. You don't have to be the best fighter in the room, but you better be ready to take a punch when it comes. Nord cuisine reflects their harsh environment. Farming is difficult in Skyrim's cold climate, so a lot of their nutrition comes from wild game. They hunt mammoth, horker, which are like walruses, various deer and elk species. They preserve meat through smoking, drying, pickling, or salting. Fish is a huge part of the diet too, especially salmon from the White River. Nords are known for their great, warm, hearty feasts. Picture a massive roast of mammoth or horker cooking over a spit in the center of the hall, with rustic desserts made from juniper or snowberries baking in cob ovens. The fruits that grow in Skyrim's bushes have made their way into the mead, giving it a reputation abroad for being both sweet and strong. Mead with juniper berries, mead with camarelt, all sorts of variations. When Nords feast, it's a community event. The hall fills with singing, storytelling, boasts about great deeds. Bards, called skalds, perform songs about legendary heroes and past battles. Despite their reputation as violent individualists, Nords actually place huge emphasis on family and community. The concept of the mead hall is central to this. It's not just a place to drink, it's the heart of the community where people gather, where decisions are made, where disputes are settled. Nordic society is organized around these communal spaces. Every major settlement has a mead hall where the Jarl holds court. The term Jarl itself is a real historical title from Scandinavian cultures, meaning a chieftain or noble. Under the Jarl, you have Thanes, which are like noble warriors who own land and have sworn loyalty. Housecarls are personal bodyguards assigned to jarls and important thanes. These aren't just hired muscle, they're honored positions that come with great respect and responsibility. Family lineage matters a lot to Nords. They track their ancestry, take pride in their clan names, pass down stories and treasures through generations. The concept of family isn't just immediate relatives either. It extends to your whole clan, your community, the people who share your meat hole. Yes, Nords love fighting. Violence is an accepted and even celebrated part of Nord culture. But it's not mindless violence. There are codes, expectations, traditions. Honor is everything. And Nord would rather die in glorious battle than live with shame. The concept of a good death is central to Nordic belief. If you die bravely in combat, your soul goes to Sovngarde, Shore's realm, where you feast and fight forever in the Hall of Valor. Cowardice is the worst possible trait. Running from battle, refusing to fight when challenged, showing fear in the face of danger, these are unforgivable. The worst insult you can call a Nord is milk drinker, implying they're weak and cowardly. Combat skill is expected of everyone. From a young age, Nords learn to fight, not just professional warriors, everyone. Even farmers and merchants can usually handle themselves in a brawl. Weapon training is mandatory. Learning to craft weapons is almost mandatory too. Blacksmithing and craftsmanship are as important as fighting ability. A Nord who can forge a good blade is as respected as one who can wield it. The creation of weapons and armor is treated almost like an art form. They might not be elegant compared to elven work, but Nord steel is solid, reliable, and deadly. Skalds are Nordic bards, but they're more than just entertainers. They're the historians, the record keepers, the culture carriers. In the early days, when Nords didn't have writing, Skalds memorized and passed down the stories of great deeds, the genealogies of important families, the lessons of the past. Even after Isgramor developed a runic writing system based on Elvish principles, oral tradition remained crucial. Skalds use poetry, music, and performance to keep Nordic history alive. They're present at major events, they compose songs about great battles, they immortalize heroes in verse. Being a skald requires skill in writing, music, and poetry. It's a respected position that requires years of training, usually at places like the Bard's College in Solitude. Good skalds are sought after by jarls and nobles. Nords are deeply superstitious. They believe in omens, in the guidance of their gods, in signs from nature. They see meaning in the flights of birds, in dreams, in unusual natural phenomena. They practice various rituals and traditions. For example, Kind's sacred trials are an ancient hunting ritual where hunters prove their worth by facing champion beasts. Completing the trials earns Kind's blessing. Standing stones are common across Skyrim. Most commemorate historical events important to the local hold, with runic inscriptions telling their stories. The greatest standing stones are cenotaphs to the dead god Shor. Nords don't pray to Shor since they believe he's truly dead, but many leave offerings of alcohol or incense at these stones out of respect, believing that Kind looks kindly upon those who grieve her husband. Birch trees are sacred to Nords, particularly old birches, which are treated as shrines to Kind. There are specific traditions around these trees, specific times for making offerings, specific rituals performed there. Nordic architecture is distinct and recognizable. They build with stone and timber, designed to withstand harsh winters. Buildings tend to be solid, functional, built for warmth and defense rather than elegance. Mead halls are the most important structures, usually the largest building in any settlement. They feature high ceilings, large central hearths for cooking and warmth, and space for many people to gather. Cities are often built with defense in mind. Windhelm is surrounded by massive stone walls, built by elven slaves in the Atmoran style. Whiterun sits on a hilltop with great defensive advantages. Solitude perches on a natural arch of stone. They decorate with carvings and tapestries depicting their history, their gods, their heroes. Dragon motifs are common despite the Dragon War, representing power and the ancient connection to dragon worship. Animal totems appear frequently, holdovers from the old Atmaran traditions. Nordic religion is fascinating because it's so different from the Imperial pantheon most people in Tamriel follow, even though there's overlap in some gods. The Nords see their gods as cyclical, tied to the fate of the world itself. They divide their pantheon into categories based on this cycle. Shor and Thuum are the dead gods, those who fought and died to bring about the current world. Shor is the Nordic version of Lorcan, the creator god who was destroyed by the other divines. For elves, Lorcan is a trickster who cursed them with mortality. For Nords, Shor is a hero who gave them the world to live in. Shor is described as a bloodthirsty warrior king who leads the Nords to victory over their Aldmeri oppressors time and again in myth. He's married to Kine and rules Sovngarde, the Nordic afterlife. But he's dead. His throne in the Hall of Valor sits empty. Nords don't pray to Shor because you can't pray to a dead god. There's an interesting theory that the player character in Skyrim might actually be Shezareen, the reincarnation of Shor in mortal form, which would explain why Shor's throne is empty when you visit Sovngarde. Thuum is Shor's shield thane, his brother who died defending him from foreign gods. When you reach Sovngarde, Thuum guards the bridge to the Hall of Valor, testing whether souls are worthy to enter. The Heart Gods are the active deities watching over the current cycle of the world. Kine, Mara, Dibella, Stun, and Hunal. Kine is huge in Nordic worship. She's the widow of Shor, the mother of men, the mother of Nords, the kiss at the end. She's the goddess of storms, wind, rain, and nature. Most importantly, she's the one who leads souls to Sovngarde. According to Nordic belief, Kine created the Nords when the sky breathed onto the land at the throat of the world. Nords called themselves the sons and daughters of Kine. She's also the mother of beasts, teaching hunters to respect the animals they hunt. Kine is a warrior goddess, fierce and powerful. She gave the Nords their innate resistance to cold. She's the one who asked Paarthurnax to teach humans the Thuum so they could fight the dragons. Warriors pray to her for strength in battle. Her symbol is the hawk. In the Hall of Valor, massive stone reliefs depict her as a female hawk, representing her as Shor's warrior wife. By the 4th era, most Nords have started calling her Kinnereth and blending her worship with the Imperial version of the goddess. But traditionalists like Froki Wedded Blade insist on using her true Nordic name and worshipping her in the old way. To them, Kinnereth is just a pale shadow of the truth. Mara in Nordic tradition is very different from the Imperial version. For Nords, she's a handmaiden of Kine and a concubine of Shor. She's associated with fertility and agriculture, sometimes connected to Nyr from the creation myth. Unlike Imperial Mara, who's all about love and compassion, Nordic Mara is also called the Tear Wife or Brood Widow of Shor, forever weeping for her dead husband. Dibella is the youngest and last wife of Shor. Unlike Mara, she wasn't that attached to Shor. Instead, she focused on the Nords themselves, teaching them arts of music, beauty, feasting, and sexuality. She's called the Bed Widow and the Moth. Her worship involves aesthetics, art, and erotic instruction through various cults. Stun is the Nordic version of Stendar, Stun's brother and Shor's shield thane. He's a warrior god who fought against the Aldmeri pantheon. According to legend, Stun taught humans how to take prisoners of war and the benefits of doing so, rather than just killing everyone. His worship has faded somewhat compared to other gods. Junal is the god of knowledge and hermetic orders, the Nordic precursor to Julianus. He was never that popular among the warlike Nords, and his worship has been fading for ages. By the 4th era, barely anyone worships him. His animal symbol is the owl, representing wisdom. Alduin is the Nordic version of Akatosh, but he's completely different from the Imperial dragon god of time. The Nords see Alduin as the World Eater, the horrible, ravaging firestorm that destroyed the last world to begin this one. Alduin represents both creation and apocalypse. He's not the chief of the pantheon, but he's its wellspring. Every kalpa, every cycle of the world, ends when Alduin wakes up and devours it. Then, a new kalpa begins. It's a cycle of destruction and renewal. The Nords work to keep Alduin asleep, to end the current Kalpa as long as possible. This is why they view Imperial worship of Akatosh as perplexing and disturbing. From the Nord perspective, the Imperials are trying to get closer to the very force that will one day destroy everything. When Alduin appears in Skyrim during the events of the game, it's not just another dragon attack, it's the potential end of the world. The prophecy, called the Dragonborn Prophecy, predicted this return, warning that when the sons of Skyrim spilled their own blood, when the World Eater woke, only the last Dragonborn could stand against him. Then there are the testing gods, Orki and the Woodland Man. These are enemy gods who constantly test the mettle of the Nords. Orki is the Nordic version of Arkai, but instead of being a god of death and the cycle of life, he's a malicious death deity borrowed from the orcs. According to Nordic myth, Orki once cursed the Nords, shortening their lifespans to just 6 years. Shor had to fight Orki and won, removing most of the curse but still leaving Nords with shorter lifespans than they once had. This is how the Nords explain why humans have shorter lives than elves. It's not natural, it's a curse from an evil god that Shor could only partially undo. The Woodland Man is Hermamora, the Daedric prince of knowledge and fate, though the Nords don't really distinguish between Daedra and Aedra. He's described as testing the Nords by occasionally bringing ancient Nords back from the dead to fight their descendants. He wants to prove that the modern Nords are weaker than their ancestors. Most Nords don't really worship Daedra, viewing them as dangerous entities to avoid. But there are exceptions. Some Daedric princes have small followings, particularly Mehrunes Dagon among warriors seeking glory in battle, and Malakath among the more tribal Nords. The Skal, an isolated Nord tribe on Solstheim, have their own unique religion centered around the All-Maker and nature spirits, completely separate from the mainstream Nordic pantheon. Back to the history. After Tiber Septim's death and ascension, the Third Empire continued for hundreds of years under the Septim dynasty. Skyrim was a province of this empire, integrated into Imperial governance while maintaining its local culture. Nords served throughout the Imperial Legion, often making up a large percentage of its fighting forces. Nordic warriors were prized for their natural hardiness, their combat skills, and their resistance to cold climates. Many of the greatest Legion commanders were Nords. During this period, Nordic culture began absorbing more Imperial influences. Cities like Solitude became cosmopolitan trading hubs. Imperial law overlaid traditional Nordic customs. The College of Winterhold grew into a prestigious institution for magical study, though most Nords remained suspicious of magic. But the Nords never fully imperialized. Even after centuries as part of the empire, they maintained their distinct identity. Jarls still ruled their holds. Mead halls remained the center of communities. The old gods were still worshipped, even if they were increasingly called by their imperial names. The most important thing the Nords got from this integration was the worship of Talos. As a Nord who became a god, Talos was the ultimate expression of Nordic potential. His worship became central to Nordic identity. Every hold had shrines to Talos. Warriors swore oaths by his name. Parents named their children after him. In the year 433 of the Third Era, everything changed. The Emperor Martin Septim sacrificed himself to stop Mehrunes Dagon's invasion during the Oblivion Crisis. With his death, the Septim bloodline ended. The Third Empire survived, but without a Dragonborn Emperor, without anyone with a legitimate claim to the Ruby Throne. This created a succession crisis that nearly tore the Empire apart. Different factions supported different claimants. Eventually, Titus Mede, a Colovian warlord, seized the imperial city and declared himself emperor, beginning the Mede dynasty, but many saw him as a usurper with no divine mandate. Skyrim stayed loyal to the Empire through this transition, though not everyone was happy about it. The Nords had supported the Septims because Tiber Septim was one of them. Titus Mede was just another Imperial with no connection to Nordic heritage. Things got much worse when the Aldmeri Dominion, a powerful alliance of high elves from Somerset Isle, declared war on the Empire in the year 171 of the Fourth Era. The Aldmeri Dominion was led by the Talmor, a faction of elven supremacists who wanted to undo creation itself and return to godhood. The Great War lasted about 5 years and was brutal. The Oldmeri Dominion invaded Hammerfell and Cyrodiil, sacking the Imperial city itself. The Empire eventually rallied and retook the capital, but both sides were exhausted. In the year 175 of the Fourth Era, Emperor Titus Med II signed the White Gold Concordat, a peace treaty that ended the war. The terms were harsh. The Empire had to cede parts of Hammerfell to the Dominion, disband the Blades, and most importantly for the Nords, outlaw the worship of Talos. That last point is crucial. The Thalmor believed that Talos couldn't actually be divine because he was a man, and man couldn't achieve apotheosis according to their theology. More than that, they believed Talos' worship was literally preventing their plan to unmake creation. By forcing the Empire to ban Talos' worship, they were striking at a key component of their cosmic agenda. For the Nords, this was unacceptable. Talos was their god, a Nord who had achieved divinity. Banning his worship was a direct attack on Nordic identity and faith. Many Nords saw the White Gold Concordat as a betrayal. The empire they had loyally served for centuries had abandoned their most sacred beliefs to appease elven supremacists. Things came to a head at Markarth. During the Great War, the native Bretons of the Reach, called Reachmen, had taken advantage of the chaos to rebel and capture Markarth. They held the city for 2 years under a king named Madanach. Ulfric Stormcloak, who was Jarl of Windhelm, gathered a Nord militia and promised them free worship of Talos if they helped retake the city. They did, brutally suppressing the Reachmen uprising in what became known as the Markarth Incident. Ulfric then demanded that the Empire make good on the promise of allowing Talos worship. The Empire initially agreed, but the Thalmor found out and demanded the Concordat be enforced. The Empire caved to Thalmor pressure, arrested Ulfric's men, who had been openly worshipping Talos, and handed some of them over to the Thalmor for interrogation. This betrayal radicalized Ulfric and many other Nords. It showed that the Empire would always choose appeasing the Thalmor over protecting Nord rights. The Thalmor began operating openly in Skyrim, hunting down Talos worshippers with the tacit approval of the Empire. To understand how offensive this was to Nords, imagine foreign religious police operating in your homeland, arresting people for worshipping their most important deity, and your own government allowing it. The Thalmor were incredibly arrogant and cruel about it too, torturing prisoners, making examples of prominent Talos worshippers. These tensions exploded at Solitude in the year 200, one of the Fourth Era. High King Torygg held court there as the traditional ruler of Skyrim. Ulfric Stormcloak challenged Torygg to single combat according to ancient Nord tradition. Torygg accepted, as refusing would have shown cowardice. Ulfric used the Thuum to shout Torygg to the ground, then killed him with his sword. According to Nord tradition, this was a legitimate way to claim the throne. Ulfric had challenged the High King, won in fair combat, and therefore should be the new High King. But others saw it differently. Elisif, Thorygg's widow, accused Ulfric of murder. The Empire backed her claim and branded Ulfric a traitor. Many Nords felt Ulfric had cheated by using the Thuum, something that hadn't been used in combat for generations and that most Nords saw as sacred. Ulfric fled to Windhelm and raised the banner of rebellion. He argued that Skyrim should be independent from the Empire, free to worship Talos openly, free from Thalmor interference. He called his followers the Stormcloaks and started recruiting Nords who felt the Empire had betrayed them. The Empire-aligned Jarls formed the Imperial Legion forces in Skyrim, determined to put down the rebellion. The civil war had begun. The Stormcloaks controlled the eastern holds, Windhelm, Riften, Dawnstar, and Winterhold initially. The Imperials held the west, Solitude, Markarth, Falkreath, and Morthal. Whiterun tried to stay neutral as long as possible, but eventually had to pick a side. Both sides had legitimate grievances. The Stormcloaks were right that the Empire had abandoned Talos worship and allowed Thalmor persecution. The Empire was right that division weakened humanity against the Aldmeri Dominion threat. The civil war was tearing Skyrim apart, weakening both the Nords and the Empire. Some saw Ulfric as a true hero fighting for Nord independence and religious freedom. Others saw him as an ambitious warmonger whose rebellion played right into Talmor hands by weakening the empire. There's actually evidence in Talmor documents that they considered Ulfric an asset because his rebellion distracted the empire from preparing for another war with the Dominion. As if a civil war wasn't enough, dragons returned to Skyrim. Alduin himself came back from his temporal banishment, and he immediately began resurrecting dead dragons from their burial mounds across Skyrim. The Dragon War was starting again, thousands of years later. The return of dragons changed everything. Suddenly the civil war seemed petty compared to the literal world eater flying around burning villages. But the Nords and Imperials were too committed to their conflict to easily make peace. Enter the last Dragonborn, the player character in Skyrim. This person could absorb dragon souls and learn shouts instantly, just like the ancient dragon priests and Tiber Septim. The Greybeards recognized them as Dragonborn and summoned them to High Hrothgar. The Dragonborn's journey took them across Skyrim's history. They learned shouts from word walls left by ancient dragon priests. They discovered the true nature of the Dragon War. They learned about the Blades, an organization founded by the Akaviri Dragonguard to protect and serve Dragonborn emperors. They also discovered that the Civil War and the Dragon Crisis were connected. Alduin's return had been prophesied to coincide with when the sons of Skyrim would spill their own blood. The Civil War had literally fulfilled the conditions for the World Eater's return. Eventually, the Dragonborn confronted Alduin in Sovngarde itself, entered the Hall of Valor, and with the help of the ancient heroes Hakon, Gormlaith, and Feldir, defeated the World Eater. This didn't destroy Alduin forever, as he is a necessary part of the cosmic cycle, but it banished him and saved the current Kalpa from ending prematurely. Now let's talk about how Nords have been portrayed across the actual games, because they've evolved significantly over the series. Arena came out in 1994 as the first Elder Scrolls game. It was a groundbreaking open-world RPG, but compared to later games, the lore and racial mechanics were pretty basic. In Arena, Nords were one of the playable races. They were described as hailing from Skyrim, as being tall and fair-haired with pale skin. The game emphasized their affinity for cold climates and their warrior culture. That's about it. There wasn't much depth to the cultural portrayal. Mechanically, Nords got bonuses to their strength and endurance stats, making them good fighters and tanks. They had a resistance to cold damage, which made sense given their homeland. But there weren't complex racial abilities or deep cultural systems. Arena's Skyrim was pretty basic too. You could travel there, visit the cities, but they weren't particularly detailed. The game was more focused on the main quest and dungeon crawling than on building detailed cultures for each province. The foundation was there though. Even in Arena, Nords were associated with cold resistance, warrior culture, and Skyrim. These basics would be expanded in every subsequent game. Daggerfall came out in 1996 and was a massive expansion of the Elder Scrolls world. Set in High Rock and Hammerfell, it didn't focus much on Nords since they weren't native to that region, but it did expand the racial mechanics. In Daggerfall, when you created a Nord character, you got specific bonuses and penalties. Nords had enhanced strength, willpower, and endurance. They got resistances to frost and shock damage. These bonuses made them excellent warriors and decent mages if you specialized in destruction magic. The game introduced more detailed character creation, including advantages and disadvantages, special abilities, and more complex stats. Nords fit into this as one of the physically powerful races with good survivability. Daggerfall's lore expanded on all the races somewhat, but since the game was set far from Skyrim, Nords mostly appeared as NPCs in cities or as members of various factions. You could join knightly orders, temples, and guilds, regardless of race, so Nord characters could pursue any path. The game did introduce more about the Septim Empire and its history, touching on Tiber Septim's conquests and the role Nords played in building the empire. But it was still pretty surface level compared to what would come later. Morrowind in 2002 was where Elder Scrolls lore really exploded. The game featured incredibly deep world building for the Dunmer culture of Morrowind, and by extension started showing more detail about neighboring cultures, including the Nords. In Morrowind, you encounter Nordic characters in several contexts. There's a Nord settlement on Solstheim called Skal Village, home to the Skal tribe who practice their own unique religion. There are also Nords living in various Morrowind cities, often as warriors, soldiers, or laborers. The game introduced more complex racial abilities. Nord characters had the Thunder Fist power, a once-per-day ability that let them cast a shock damage spell with their hands. They maintained their frost resistance as a permanent passive ability. They also got the Woad power, which boosted their health temporarily. More importantly, Morrowind started showing cultural tensions between Nords and Dunmer. The history of the First Empire's invasion of Morrowind came up in books and dialogue. The Dunmer remembered the Nordic occupation, and there was historical animosity between the races. The Blood Moon expansion added much more Nordic content. Set primarily on Solstheim, it featured extensive interaction with the Skal and exploration of Nordic ruins. The expansion showed different facets of Nord culture through the isolated Skal who had maintained more traditional practices. Nordic architecture appeared in the form of barrows and burial mounds scattered across Solstheim. These dungeons were tombs of ancient Nord warriors, filled with Draugr, undead Nords who guarded the graves. The aesthetic was distinctly Nordic, with rough stone construction and dragon decorations. Morrowind books expanded greatly on Nordic history and religion. Books like Varieties of Faith in the Empire detailed the Nordic pantheon. The 5 Songs of King Wulfart told legendary Nordic stories. King Edward gave Nord perspectives on events. The game was building a rich tapestry of Nord lore even though they weren't the focus. Character-wise, Nords in Morrowind tended to be straightforward, often serving as warriors or laborers. Some were Imperial Legion soldiers, others were adventurers or mercenaries. The game didn't make them one-dimensional though. You met scholarly Nords, merchant Nords, even some Nord mages. The game started establishing the Nord stereotype of being anti-magic. Several Nord NPCs expressed distrust of mages and preference for honest steel, but it wasn't universal. The game showed diversity within the race. Oblivion came out in 2006, set in Cyrodiil during the Oblivion Crisis. Once again, Nords weren't the focus, but their presence and portrayal continued evolving. In Oblivion, Nord characters maintained their frost resistance and shock resistance, though the specific powers changed. They now had the Frost Shield power and Woad for health boost. Their racial bonuses emphasized strength, endurance, and willpower. The game featured numerous Nord NPCs throughout Cyrodiil. Many served in the Imperial Legion or as city guards. Several notable characters were Nord, including Thorinir, a merchant in the Imperial City, and various arena fighters. Bruma, the northernmost city in Cyrodiil, bordering Skyrim, had a distinctly Nordic flavor. The Jarl of Bruma, though technically an Imperial count, used the Nordic title. The city's architecture incorporated Nordic elements. The population included many Nords, and the culture felt more Nordic than Imperial. The Knights of the Nine expansion included Brother Har, a Nord monk at the Priory of the Nine. This showed that Nords could be found in all walks of life, even contemplative religious orders. Oblivion's voice acting was limited, with multiple characters sharing the same voice actors, but it started giving races more distinct speech patterns. Nord characters often had deeper voices and spoke more directly than other races. The game's books continued expanding Nordic lore. The legendary Sancretor detailed Tiber Septim's conquest and the role of Nords in recognizing and supporting him. Other books explored Nordic history, religion, and culture. One interesting aspect was how Oblivion showed Nords as fully integrated into Imperial society. They weren't foreign outsiders, but citizens of the Empire who maintained their cultural identity while participating in Imperial institutions. This made sense given centuries of being part of the Empire. Then came Skyrim in 2011, and everything changed. For the first time, we got to see Skyrim itself in full detail, experience Nordic culture firsthand and understand what it really meant to be a Nord. Skyrim was a massive leap in portraying Nordic culture. Instead of reading about mead halls, you visited them. Instead of hearing about jarls, you met them and participated in their courts. Instead of learning about Nordic religion secondhand, you encountered shrines, performed rituals, and experienced their beliefs directly. The game opened with you as a prisoner about to be executed at Helgen. Whether you chose to play as a Nord or another race, you immediately encountered Nordic culture through characters like Ralof and Hadvar, who represented the two sides of the Civil War. As a playable race, Nords in Skyrim maintained their frost resistance, now set at 50% resistance to frost damage. They gained a new power called Battle Cry, which caused nearby enemies to flee for 30 seconds once per day. This reflected Nordic intimidation tactics and their fearsome reputation. Their racial stat bonuses gave them plus 10 to two-handed weapons, plus 5 to one-handed, smithing, block, speech, and light armor. This made them naturally suited to warrior playstyles, though you could build them however you wanted. Each of Skyrim's 9 holds had its own distinct character, reflecting different aspects of Nordic culture. Whiterun, built around the ancient Jorvaskr Mead Hall, represented traditional Nordic values. The companions, descendants of the 500 who sailed with Ysgramor, made their home there. The city was a major trading hub but maintained Nordic traditions. Jarl Balgruf the Greater tried to keep Whiterun neutral in the Civil War, showing the complexity of Nordic politics. Windhelm, the ancient city built by Ysgramor himself, served as Ulfric's stronghold. The city's architecture was distinctly Atmoran, all grey stone and imposing walls. The Palace of the Kings, where Ulfric held court, featured the throne where Ysgramor once sat. But Windhelm also showed the darker side of Nordic culture, with the Grey Quarter, where Dunmer refugees lived in poverty and faced discrimination. Solitude, the capital of Skyrim, was the most imperial of the cities. Built on a natural stone arch, it housed Castle Dour, where General Tullius commanded imperial forces. The city was wealthy, cosmopolitan, home to the Bard's College and the famous burning of King Olaf festival, yet it still had Nordic character in its mead halls and traditions. Riften sat in the southeast, a city known for corruption and the Thieves' Guild. Despite its reputation, it housed the Temple of Mara, one of the few remaining explicitly Nordic temples. The Jarl's Longhouse, Mistweil Keep, maintained traditional Nordic architecture. Markarth in the Reach was unique, built into the ruins of an ancient Dwemer city. The native Reachmen had a different culture from Nords, worshipping old gods and practicing their own traditions. The city showed how Skyrim wasn't culturally monolithic. Morthul, a small town in the marshes of Hjalmarch, represented rural Nordic life. The people there dealt with practical concerns like drainage, vampires, and making ends meet. Not every Nord was a great warrior or held strong political opinions. Falkreath in the southern pine forests was known for its massive graveyard. The Hold's culture reflected the Nordic relationship with death and honor in dying. Winterhold, once a great city, was now just a small village after the Great Collapse destroyed most of it. The College of Winterhold survived, creating tension between the magic-wielding mages and the suspicious Nords of the town. Dawnstar, on the northern coast, dealt with nightmares caused by a Daedric plot. The city's temple to Mara and its position on major shipping routes showed the diversity of Nordic settlements. Nordic factions in Skyrim. Skyrim featured several factions that showcased different aspects of Nord culture. The Companions were the most explicitly Nordic faction. Descended from Ysgramor's 500, they lived in Orvaskr and took contracts as warriors for hire. They valued honor above all, refused to steal or murder for coin, and maintained ancient Nordic traditions. The questline revealed they harbored a secret. The inner circle were werewolves, a gift from Hircine they received generations ago, but some now saw as a curse. The Stormcloaks represented Nordic nationalism and traditionalism. Their questline involved fighting for Skyrim's independence, retaking holds from Imperial control, and ultimately marching on Solitude. Ulfric's court in Windhelm showed traditional Nordic governance with jarls, thanes, and longhouse meetings. The Imperial Legion in Skyrim represented Nords, who believed in the Empire despite the Talos ban. General Tullius was an Imperial, but many of his soldiers and officers were Nords, like Legaterike, who secretly worshipped Talos but believed the Empire was necessary to eventually defeat the Thalmor. Their questline involved crushing the Stormcloak Rebellion and maintaining Imperial unity. The Greybeards at High Hrothgar represented the way of the voice and the philosophical side of Nordic culture. Master Arngeir served as spokesman since the other Greybeards couldn't speak without causing destruction. They taught the Dragonborn about the Thuum and its proper use, emphasizing meditation and restraint over using it as a weapon. The College of Winterhold showed that not all Nords were anti-magic, though the Nord mages there often faced suspicion from their own people. The college's multicultural nature contrasted with the more homogeneous Nordic factions. Walking through Skyrim, you experienced Nordic daily life in detail. Farmers worked their fields despite the harsh climate, growing wheat, potatoes, and cabbage while raising cattle. Fishermen worked the rivers and coasts. Hunters tracked game through the forests. Blacksmiths worked forges in every town, crafting weapons and armor. You could watch them work, hear them complain about ore shipments or business. Eorlund Greymane at the Skyforge was considered the best smith in Skyrim, and his work with Skyforge steel was legendary. Merchants operated stalls and shops, trading goods from across Tamriel. Some were honest, others less so. Nordic merchants weren't always the best at business compared to other races, but they were straightforward in their dealings. Innkeepers ran mead halls and taverns in every settlement. Places like the Bannered Mare in Whiterun or Candlehearth Hall in Windhelm were social centers where you heard gossip, hired mercenaries, or just rested. The inns always had mead, ale, and food available. Bards performed in the taverns, singing songs of Nordic heroes and recent events. After completing the Bard's College questline, bards would even sing songs about the Dragonborn's exploits. Guards patrolled the streets, and they all had similar dialogue trees that became famous for their repetitiveness. I used to be an adventurer like you. Then I took an arrow in the knee, became one of gaming's most quoted lines. Skyrim showed Nordic religion in ways previous games couldn't. Shrines to the divines appeared throughout the world. You could pray at them for blessings, leave offerings, witness pilgrims making their journeys. Temples existed in major cities. The Temple of Kinnereth in Whiterun, the Temple of Dibella in Markarth, the Temple of Mara in Riften. Each had priests or priestesses who performed their duties and could tell you about their deities. The game showed the tension between Old Nordic religion and the Imperial pantheon. Some NPCs used Nordic names for gods like Kine, while others used Imperial names like Kinnereth. Traditionalists complained about how Nordic religion was being diluted. Talos worship happened secretly despite the ban. You could find hidden shrines in homes, encounter secret Talos worshippers, and see the Thalmor hunting down violators. This religious persecution drove home how serious the conflict was. The game featured questlines involving Daedric princes, Mehrunes, Dagon, Molag, Bal, Namira, and all the others had shrines or questlines where they interacted with mortals. While Nords traditionally avoided Daedra worship, individual Nords could and did serve Daedric princes. Skyrim established the visual language of Nordic culture. Buildings used local materials, greystone, timber, thatch roofing. Everything looked weathered and worn from the harsh climate. Mead halls featured high-peaked roofs, carved wooden beams, and large central hearths. The interiors had long tables, mounted animal heads, weapons on the walls. Jarl's palaces like Dragon's Reach in Whiterun or the Palace of the Kings in Windhelm exemplified this style on a grand scale. Common houses were smaller but followed similar principles. Stone foundations, wooden upper floors, small windows to keep warmth in. They weren't fancy, but they were solid and practical. Nordic ruins, the barrows and tombs scattered across Skyrim used massive stone blocks fitted together. They featured trap mechanisms, puzzle doors with claw keys, and chambers guarded by Draugr. The architecture suggested the ancient Nords had advanced construction techniques. Dragon walls with word walls were masterpieces of Nordic stonework. Massive stone structures carved with draconic script, they marked important sites and contained power that Dragonborn could absorb. Standing stones, large carved monoliths, dotted the landscape. The guardian stones near Helgen let you choose blessings for different play styles. Other standing stones offered different powers. The Skyforge itself was a mystery. Its architecture predated even the Snow Elves, suggesting some unknown ancient civilization built it. The Companions built Jorvaskr around it specifically to have access to its power. Nordic fashion in Skyrim ranged from practical to ceremonial. Common folk wore simple tunics, trousers, boots, and cloaks suited for cold weather. Fur was common, both for warmth and because it was locally available. Warriors wore various armor types. Light armor included leather and fur, practical for hunting and scouting. Heavy armor ranged from iron and steel to the distinctive Nordic carved armor, which featured intricate knotwork designs and horned helmets. Stormcloak soldiers wore distinctive blue military uniforms with bear symbols, while Imperial aligned Nords wore the red Legion uniforms. Each side's equipment reflected their allegiance. Jarls and nobles wore finer clothes, richly dyed fabrics, and better quality furs, but even wealthy Nords dressed practically compared to Imperial nobility. Function over form was the Nordic way. Nordic weapons included iron and steel swords, axes, greatswords, warhammers, and bows. The designs were practical and sturdy. Skyforge steel weapons were superior quality, but still followed Nordic aesthetic principles: effective, reliable, unpretentious. Ancient Nord weapons found in barrows had a distinct look, more ornate than contemporary Nordic weapons, but still functional. These weapons proved that ancient Nords had sophisticated metalworking techniques. One of Skyrim's most iconic enemies were the Draugr, undead Nords who guarded the ancient barrows. These weren't mindless zombies. According to Nordic beliefs, when important warriors died, their servants would willingly sacrifice themselves to serve their masters in death. The dragon cult practiced this extensively. When a dragon priest died, his followers would be interred with him, using some kind of magic or ritual to persist after death as guardians. Over thousands of years, these Draugr remained, still guarding their masters' tombs. Draugr came in various types, from the basic Draugr who could barely fight to Draugr deathlords who could use powerful shouts. Some wielded weapons, others used magic. The strongest could shout with the Thuum just like dragon priests. Fighting through Nordic barrows became a core part of the Skyrim experience. You'd solve puzzle doors, avoid traps, fight waves of Draugr, and ultimately face a boss, Draugr, or dragon priest at the end. These dungeons held treasure, word walls, and pieces of Nordic history. The Draugr themselves looked horrific, their ancient flesh preserved but decayed, wrapped in burial shrouds or wearing ancient armor. They made distinctive sounds, groaning and speaking fragments of the dragon language. Encountering them reinforced the ancient, haunted nature of Skyrim's past. These weren't just generic undead, they were the physical remnants of Nordic history, warriors who had served dragon lords thousands of years ago, still carrying out their duties. Dragon priests were the elite enemies, incredibly powerful undead mages who had ruled in the name of dragons during the Dragon War. Each one wore a unique mask with magical properties, and defeating them was a significant challenge. The dragon priests included Morokei at the College of Winterhold, Croesus atop Sheerpoint, Volsung near Volskige, Ragot at Forelhost, and several others. Each had their own dungeon or location where they rested. These fights showcased the power of ancient Nordic magic users. They could use multiple schools of magic simultaneously, summon creatures, and use devastating shouts. They represented what Nords could achieve when they embraced magic rather than disdaining it. Collecting all the dragon priest masks and bringing them to Bromjanar Sanctuary in Labyrinthian unlocked the final mask, Konarek, the strongest of them all. This collectible quest showed the extent of the dragon cult's reach across Skyrim. The dragon priests also appeared in the lore through various books and inscriptions. You learned about their tyranny, their power, and how the ancient Nords eventually overthrew them. They represented a dark chapter in Nordic history that modern Nords had moved beyond. Skyrim reinforced the Nordic cultural suspicion of magic while also showing it wasn't universal. Many Nord NPCs expressed distrust of mages. Don't much like sorcerers is a common sentiment. The College of Winterhold faced hostility from the people of Winterhold, who blamed them for the Great Collapse even though the college saved parts of the city. This anti-magic bias has historical roots. The dragon cult used magic to oppress people. The snow elves were powerful mages. Throughout history, Nordic enemies had often relied on magic while Nords relied on steel and strength. But the game showed Nordic mages existed. Unfert, the Unliving, served as court wizard in Windhelm despite Ulfric's traditionalism. Several Nords studied at the College of Winterhold. The ancient Nords had clearly been capable of powerful magic, as evidenced by the enchantments and wards in their ruins. The Thuum itself blurred the line. It was a form of magic, using your voice to create supernatural effects. But Nords didn't see it as magic in the same way. The voice was a gift from Kine, tied to their very nature as children of the sky. It was different from book learning and spell casting. This distinction mattered to Nords. Using the Thuum was acceptable because it was their birthright. Using magic from books and staves was suspicious foreign knowledge. The fact that this distinction didn't hold up to scrutiny didn't matter. It was a cultural bias, not a logical position. Skyrim didn't shy away from showing the negative aspects of Nordic culture. The treatment of Dunmer refugees in Windhelm's Grey Quarter was a clear example of Nordic prejudice. After the Red Mountain erupted and destroyed much of Morrowind, Dark Elf refugees fled to Skyrim. Ulfric's Stormcloak allowed them to settle in Windhelm, but confined them to the Grey Quarter, a rundown section of the city. The Dunmer faced discrimination, struggled to find work outside the quarter, and were treated as second-class residents. Nord NPCs in Windhelm would make racist comments about the Dunmer. Rolf, Stonefist, and his friends actively harassed Dark Elves. When you first enter Windhelm, you might witness Rolf confronting Suvaris Atheron and calling her names. Ulfric's advisor, Galmar Stonefist, shares his brother Rolf's prejudices. Even Ulfric himself, while not actively hostile to the Dunmer, does nothing to improve their situation or defend them from harassment. His focus on the civil war means he ignores the suffering of non-Nord residents. This wasn't unique to Windhelm. Argonians in Windhelm were forced to live on the docks, not even allowed in the Grey Quarter. They worked loading and unloading ships in terrible conditions. The game used this to show that Nordic nationalism and traditionalism had ugly sides. The Stormcloaks claimed to fight for freedom and rights, but only for Nords. Other races were at best tolerated, at worst oppressed. Not all Nords were racist, of course. Brunwulf Freewinter spoke out against the treatment of Dunmer. Many Nords in other cities lived peacefully alongside other races, but the cultural tendency toward viewing Nords as superior was present throughout Skyrim. The Civil War questline forced players to engage with Nordic politics and choose between two very different visions for Skyrim's future. The Stormcloak position was clear. Skyrim should be independent, free to worship Talos, free from Imperial and Talmor interference. Ulfric argued that the Empire had abandoned Nordic values, that it was weak and corrupted by foreign influence. True Nords should govern themselves according to their own traditions. Stormcloak supporters included traditionalists, Talos worshippers, those who resented imperial authority, and Nords who felt marginalized by the cosmopolitan direction the Empire was taking. They saw the White Gold Concordat as ultimate proof that the Empire would betray Nordic interests. The Imperial position was more complex. They acknowledged that Talos ban was wrong and that the Thalmor were the real enemy. But they argued that a divided Empire couldn't defeat the Aldmeri Dominion. Skyrim's independence would weaken humanity at the worst possible time. Imperial supporters included those who valued stability, those who thought in terms of the greater good, Nords with connections to other provinces, and people who feared what Ulfric's nationalism might lead to. They saw the civil war as exactly what the Talmor wanted, humans killing humans instead of preparing for the real threat. Both sides had merit. The Empire had betrayed its values by banning Talos worship, but Ulfric's rebellion was tearing Skyrim apart and playing into Talmor hands. There was no clearly right choice, which made the questline compelling. The Civil War also showed different kinds of Nord identity. Legetrike was as much a Nord as Ulfric, but she defined being Nord differently. For her, being Nord meant strength, honor, and pragmatic thinking. The Empire hadn't changed who she was. She still worshipped Talos in secret and hoped the Empire would eventually throw off the Concordat. For Ulfric, being Nord meant independence, maintaining traditions even if impractical, and refusing to compromise with those who didn't respect Nordic values. The Empire had proven it would always put other concerns before Nordic rights. This internal conflict within Nordic culture, between tradition and adaptation, isolationism and integration, made the Nords in Skyrim feel real and complex. Skyrim brought many legendary Nordic figures to life through various questlines and encounters. Ysgramor appeared through his legacy. His tomb at Ysgramor's tomb was a pilgrimage site for the companions. His axe, Wuthrad, was broken and needed to be reforged. The companion's questline involved recovering the fragments and reforging it, then using it to enter his tomb. Inside his tomb, you encountered the ghosts of Ysgramor's 500 companions. Not actually 500 ghosts, just a few representing them. They tested your worth as a warrior before allowing you to proceed. Jurgen Windcaller's tomb could be explored as part of the Greybeard's training. His remains rested in Ustengrav, and recovering the horn of Jurgen Windcaller was a test the Greybeard set for the Dragonborn. King Olaf One-Eye, an ancient High King of Skyrim, was celebrated in the Burning of King Olaf festival in Solitude. According to legend, he captured the dragon Numenex and forced it to serve him. The Bard's College questline involved finding the truth about this legend and burning an effigy of Olaf. Potema the Wolf Queen was one of Skyrim's most infamous figures. A necromancer and would-be empress, she nearly destroyed the Septim Empire in her bid for power. In Skyrim, you encountered her revived spirit in Solitude and had to defeat her again. The Free Tongues who banished Alduin, Hakon One-Eye, Gormleif Golden-Hild, and Feldir the Old appeared in Sovngarde during the final battle against Alduin. You fought alongside these legendary heroes to defeat the World Eater. Each of these figures represented different aspects of Nordic identity. Ysgramor was the founder, the warrior king. Jurgen Windcaller was the philosopher who redirected Nordic culture toward peace. Olaf was the cunning ruler who mixed truth and legend. Potema was the ambitious sorceress who used any means for power. The ancient tongues were the saviors who made the ultimate sacrifice. The endgame of Skyrim's main quest took you to Sovngarde, the Nordic afterlife. This was an incredible moment because it showed Nordic theology wasn't just myth. Sovngarde was real. You could go there, walk its lands, meet its inhabitants. The realm appeared as an eternal twilight with a clear river running through it. The sky burned with auroras. The Hall of Valor rose in the distance, a massive structure that echoed the design of Nordic mead halls but scaled up to divine proportions. The souls of great Nordic warriors walked the land, celebrating their victories, preparing to fight again. They spoke of their deaths, of the battles they'd won, of the honor they'd earned. They had achieved what every Nord hoped for, eternity in Shor's Hall. But Alduin was devouring souls in the Soul Cairn before they could reach the Hall of Valor, his mist obscuring the path. You had to clear the mist by learning a special shout called Clear Skies, then cross the Whalebone Bridge where Thuum guarded the way. Thuum tested you, demanding to know by what right you sought entry to Shor's Hall. Depending on your questline completions, you could claim right by various paths, as Dragonborn, as champion of a Daedric prince, as a member of the Companions, or as a master of a guild. Thuum then fought you in single combat to test your worth. After proving yourself, Thuum allowed you to cross. The Hall of Valor opened before you, and inside you found the three ancient tongues waiting. Ysgramor and the other legendary heroes were presumably there too, though the game didn't show them. Shor's throne sat empty at the head of the hall, reinforcing the Nordic belief that Shor was truly dead. But his hall persisted, his eternal reward for Nordic heroes who died bravely. Sovngarde wasn't paradise in the conventional sense. It was a warrior's heaven, all fighting and feasting. That's what made it perfect for Nords. They didn't want harps and clouds. They wanted mead and glorious battle for eternity. The Hall of Valor's architecture was stunning. Massive pillars, stone reliefs depicting Kine and Nordic legends, the great throne waiting for a king who would never return. Everything about it felt ancient and powerful. After defeating Alduin with the help of the Three Tongues, the souls trapped by his mist flooded into Sovngarde to join the eternal celebration. Soon returned you to Skyrim with his blessing, recognizing you as one of the greatest Nordic heroes. The Dawnguard DLC added more Nordic content, particularly around vampire hunting and the history of snow elves. The Dawnguard were an ancient order of vampire hunters re-established by Isran to combat a vampire threat. They operated out of Fort Dawnguard in the Rift. While not exclusively Nordic, the organization reflected Nordic values of direct action and martial prowess. The quest line involved discovering an ancient prophecy about a tyranny of the sun, where vampires would be able to walk in daylight. Lord Harkon, an ancient vampire lord, sought to fulfill this prophecy using his daughter Serana and the power of Elder Scrolls. Throughout the questline, you encountered more ancient Nord ruins, including Ancestor Glade and Darkfall Cave. You discovered the ancient Falmer civilization before their corruption, seeing their architecture and culture through their ruins. The questline culminated in either siding with the Dawnguard to stop Harkon or joining Harkon's vampire court. Either way, it added to the picture of Nordic history and the ongoing struggle between light and darkness that characterized Nordic mythology. The Dragonborn DLC returned to Solstheim, showing how the island had changed since Morrowind's Blood Moon expansion. After the Red Mountain eruption, Solstheim had been given to the Dark Elves as a refuge. The island's culture became a mix of Nordic and Dunmer influences. Raven Rock, the main settlement, was primarily Dunmer, but with Nordic architecture and history. The questline involved Hermaeus Mora, the Daedric Prince of Knowledge, and Miraak, the first Dragonborn who had served the dragon cult and then betrayed it to serve Mora instead. Miraak represented what a Nordic Dragonborn could become if they pursued power without restraint. All Maker Stones around the island had been corrupted by Miraak's influence, affecting the Skal population. The Skal themselves represented the most traditional Nordic culture, maintaining practices and beliefs that mainland Skyrim had mostly abandoned. The Temple of Miraak showed dragon cult architecture at its most elaborate. The cultists serving Miraak dressed in ceremonial robes and worshipped him as their master. It was a glimpse into what the dragon cult had been like at its height. Apocrypha, Hermaeus Mora's realm of oblivion, was where the final confrontation occurred. This realm of infinite books and forbidden knowledge was as far from traditional Nordic values as possible, yet here was where a Nordic Dragonborn had ended up. The contrast between the Skal's simple, nature-focused spirituality and Miraak's obsessive pursuit of power through forbidden knowledge highlighted two possible paths for Nordic culture. Throughout Skyrim, you encountered the dragon language constantly. Thuum shouts used it. Word walls were written in it. Draugr spoke fragments of it. Even some location names used it. The dragon language had its own alphabet and grammar. It was the language of power itself, where words and meaning were one. Speaking a word in the dragon language didn't just describe something. It asserted its truth unto reality. Some dragon words that appeared frequently. Fus meaning force, Ro meaning balance, Da meaning push, forming the unrelenting force Shout Fus Ro Da that became famous. Yol meaning fire, Tur meaning inferno, Shul meaning sun, forming the fire breath shout. Location names often used the dragon language. Sovngarde itself combined Sovn meaning hope with Garde meaning guard or realm. Dragon's Reach was actually Dragon's Reach, with the dragon language being the reason for that name. The ancient Nords had adopted the dragon language for their own use, creating the Nordic runic system. You could find these runes on standing stones, tomb inscriptions, and ancient Nordic artifacts. Modern Nords mostly didn't know the dragon language anymore. It had become the exclusive province of scholars, dragon priests in their time, and the Greybeards. The Thuum itself was mostly forgotten, except by the most dedicated students. This linguistic history showed the evolution of Nordic culture. They had started by worshipping dragons and speaking their language. After the Dragon War, they gradually moved away from that connection. By the Fourth Era, most Nords were completely disconnected from the dragon language and only vaguely aware of its significance. Looking at how Nords were portrayed across all the games shows a clear evolution in depth and nuance. Arena gave us the basic concept: strong warriors from a cold land with resistance to frost. That was it. They were one option among many races, mechanically suitable for fighter builds with minimal cultural characterization. Daggerfall expanded the mechanics slightly, adding more resistances and refining stat bonuses. The lore began growing through books and background details, but Nords still weren't deeply explored since they weren't native to the game's setting. Morrowind marked the first real cultural development. Through the Skull on Solstheim, through Nord NPCs in Morrowind, and especially through the wealth of new in-game books, Nords started becoming a real culture rather than just a race of warriors. The conflict between Nords and Dunmer added historical context. Oblivion continued this development, showing Nords as integrated citizens of the Empire while maintaining distinct identity. The game added personality to Nord NPCs, showed them in various roles beyond just warriors, and continued expanding the lore through books and dialogue. Then, Skyrim brought it all together. For the first time, we saw Nordic culture in its home environment, in all its complexity. We saw the good: community, honor, bravery, craft skills. We saw the bad: prejudice, stubbornness, anti-intellectualism. We saw the conflicted: tradition versus progress, independence versus unity, faith versus pragmatism. The Nords of Skyrim felt like a real culture with real problems. They weren't just barbarian warriors. They were people with families, jobs, beliefs, and different opinions about the future of their homeland. Some were heroes, some were villains, most were just trying to get by. Beyond Skyrim itself, Nordic culture has influenced all of Tamriel. The modern concept of the Empire was built on Nordic military might. Tiber Septim was Nord, or at least trained as one. The Imperial Legion's effectiveness comes partly from Nordic warrior traditions. The worship of the 9 divines includes Talos, a Nord achievement. Even though the Falmer banned it, the fact that a human achieved apotheosis remains significant for all humanity, not just Nords. Nordic architecture appears throughout the Empire. The warrior culture has influenced military thinking across Tamriel. The concept of the Thuum and Dragonborn is fundamentally Nordic, shaping how everyone understands dragons and the dragon language. The Nordic First Empire's conquests spread Atmoran peoples across the north. Many kingdoms and cultures can trace their ancestry back to those expansions. The intermingling of Nordic and other cultures created hybrid populations and blended traditions. Even the Elvish cultures have been shaped by conflict with Nords. The Snow Elves were completely destroyed by Nordic expansion. The Dunmer maintained generational memories of Nordic invasions. High Elves view Talos worship as heresy, partly because a Nord achieved what they believe only Elves should be capable of. The end of Skyrim's events leaves the Nords at a crossroads. Depending on player choices, either Skyrim is independent under Ulfric or remains part of the Empire under a new Jarl of Solitude. Either way, the Talmor remain a threat. Alduin has been defeated, but he's not permanently destroyed. The World Eater will return someday to end this Kalpa and begin another. The prophecy has been fulfilled, but the greater cycle continues. The dragons themselves, minus Alduin, are still around. Paarthurnax leads the remaining dragons at the throat of the world, trying to teach them the way of the voice. Whether dragons can truly overcome their nature to dominate remains to be seen. The civil war has left scars. Families are divided. Cities have changed hands. Wherever the Dragonborn led their forces, people died. Those wounds will take time to heal. The question of Nordic identity, what it means to be Nord, what values Skyrim should embrace, remains unresolved. The Falmer are preparing for another war with the Empire. When that war comes, Skyrim will be dragged into it, whether independent or Imperial. The Nords will have to fight again, either as part of a unified empire or as an independent kingdom. Their survival depends on the choices made during the Civil War. Magic remains controversial in Nordic culture. The College of Winterhold exists, but Nord mages still face suspicion. Whether Nordic culture can reconcile its warrior traditions with the reality that magic is necessary in the modern world is an open question. The relationship with other races needs addressing. The treatment of Dunmer and Argonians in Windhelm, the general suspicion of outsiders, these attitudes could isolate Skyrim or lead to internal conflicts. Whether Nords can embrace multiculturalism without losing their distinct identity is uncertain. The way of the voice versus using the Thuum for war has been brought to the fore by the Dragonborn's actions. If the Dragonborn used shouts extensively in combat, they've proven that the voice can be a weapon again. The Greybeards disapprove, but pragmatic Nords might see the value. It's obvious that Bethesda drew heavily from Norse and Viking culture for the Nords. The parallels are everywhere. Meat halls match the historical Norse hall culture. Jarls and Thanes are actual Scandinavian titles. The pantheon resembles Norse mythology with gods like Shor echoing Odin. The aesthetic pulls from Viking art and architecture. But the Nords aren't just Vikings, they're a unique blend. The Thuum has no real equivalent in Norse mythology. The dragon cult is original to Elder Scrolls. The religious relationship with Kine and the concept of being children of the sky is unique. The historical trajectory is different too. The Nords didn't raid and trade like Vikings did. They were refugees who became conquerors, who became empire builders. The first empire wasn't like the Viking Age expansions. It was a more traditional conquest empire. The cultural values align in some ways. Honor, bravery, martial prowess, these are shared. But Nordic attitudes toward magic don't match historical Norse culture, which had vulvas and magic users. The historical Norse were seafaring traders as much as warriors, while Skyrim's Nords are primarily land-based. The mythology is inspired by but distinct from Norse myth. Shor isn't Odin, despite similarities. The Nordic creation myth is the Elder Scrolls cosmology, not Norse cosmology. Sovngarde echoes Valhalla but functions differently. This blend of inspiration and originality makes the Nords feel familiar yet unique. They're recognizably Nordic-inspired, but they're their own culture within the Elder Scrolls universe. Bethesda took real-world elements and transformed them into something that fits the larger lore. From a game design perspective, the Nords serve specific purposes across the series. They're the fighter race, the straightforward warrior option for players who want to hit things hard and not worry about complex mechanics. Their racial abilities across games have consistently supported combat builds. Frost resistance helps in their homeland. The battlecry ability in Skyrim provides crowd control. Their stat bonuses emphasize physical combat skills. But Bethesda has consciously worked to make them more than just stat blocks. Each game added layers of culture, motivation, and complexity. By Skyrim, choosing to play a Nord wasn't just a mechanical choice. It was a role-playing choice with implications for how NPCs treated you and how you engaged with the story. The Civil War questline, in particular, works differently if you're playing a Nord. You're not an outsider choosing sides in someone else's conflict. You're a Nord making decisions about your own people's future. That adds weight to the choices. The Dragonborn being potentially Nord creates interesting narrative resonances. Ysgramor, Tiber Septim, Wulfart, Mirak, these were all Nordic or associated with Nordic culture. A Nord Dragonborn continues that tradition. But Bethesda also made sure you could play any race and still experience the full story. The Dragonborn's significance doesn't depend on being Nord. The Civil War allows any race to join either side. The cultural content is available to all players. This balance between racial distinctness and accessibility is crucial. The Nords need to feel different from Imperials, Dunmer, or High Elves. But players of any race need to feel they can engage with Nordic culture meaningfully. There are several persistent misconceptions about Nord culture that the games themselves contradict. The first is that all Nords are dumb. Yes, the culture values physical prowess over intellectual pursuits. Yes, many Nords are suspicious of book learning, but Nord scholars exist. The Bard's College produces educated Nords. Historical figures like Jürgen Windcaller were philosophical thinkers. Stupidity isn't a racial trait, it's a stereotype. The second is that Nords hate all magic. More accurately, Nords are suspicious of mages and prefer not to rely on magic themselves. But Nord mages exist throughout the series. The ancient Nords clearly used magic extensively, as evidenced by dragon priests and enchanted artifacts. The cultural bias against magic is just that, a bias, not an absolute rule. The third is that all Nords are racist. Skyrim shows prejudice exists, particularly in Windhelm, but it also shows Nords like Brunwulf Freewinter opposing that prejudice. Balgruf treats all races fairly in Whiterun. Many Nords in Solitude live peacefully alongside other races. Individual bigotry exists, but it's not universal. The fourth is that Nords are always loyal to the Empire or always want independence. The Civil War shows the Nord population is divided. There are principled arguments on both sides. Reducing it to Nords are rebels or Nords are Imperial loyalists misses the nuance. The fifth is that Nords only care about combat. While warrior culture is central, Nords also value craftsmanship, particularly smithing and metalwork. They value poetry and song through skald traditions. They value family and community bonds. Fighting ability is important, but it's not the only thing Nords care about. These misconceptions usually come from taking stereotypes at face value rather than engaging with the actual portrayal across games and lore texts. Elder Scrolls Online takes place during the Second Era, about 1,000 years before Skyrim. This gives us a completely different perspective on Nordic culture and politics during a tumultuous period. During Esso's time period, Skyrim is actually split into two kingdoms. After High King Logrolf was assassinated in the year 431 of the Second Era, a succession crisis emerged. His daughter Freydis of Windhelm should have inherited the throne, but Jarlsvart of Solitude challenged her claim and called for a moot. The moot split. Some Jarls recognized Freydis as High Queen, others backed Svart as High King. This schism divided Skyrim geographically and culturally into Eastern Skyrim and Western Skyrim. Eastern Skyrim, also called the Old Holds, consisted of Eastmarch, the Rift, the Pale, and Winterhold. These were the traditionalist holds that maintained the old ways. The Nords there were more conservative, more isolationist, more devoted to ancient Nordic customs. Windhelm served as their capital under High Queen Freydis, and later her descendants. Western Skyrim consisted of Hafengar, Hjalmarch, Carthold, the Reach, and Whiterun. These were the progressive holds with closer ties to Cyrodiil and the wider world. They were more cosmopolitan, more willing to change with the times. Solitude served as their capital under High King Svart and later High King Svargrim. This division wasn't just political. It reflected real cultural differences that had existed in Skyrim for generations. The East valued tradition, the West valued adaptation. The East looked inward, the West looked outward. Eastern Skyrim became part of the Ebonheart Pact during the Three Banners War. This alliance between the Nords of Eastern Skyrim, the Dunmer of Morrowind, and the Argonians of Blackmarsh was born from necessity. In the year 572 of the Second Era, the Akaviri invaded again. The snow demons of Kamal, led by Adasum Dir Kamal, swept across eastern Tamriel. They besieged Windhelm, killing Mabjarn Flamehair and her daughter Nirnhilde. Prince Jorun, who would become Jorun the Skald King, traveled to High Hrothgar and convinced the Greybeards to help. The Greybeard summoned the ghost of Wulfarth the Ash King, an ancient Nordic hero. Together, Jorunn and Wulfarth assembled an army. The snow demons avoided Riften after seeing the massive Nordic force assembled there and fled south into Morrowind's Stone Falls region. There, they were caught between the Nordic army from the north and Dunmer forces from the south. The combined armies crushed the Akaviri invasion at the Battle of Stone Falls. This shared victory against a common enemy forged the Ebonheart Pact. Three races that had been enemies for most of history agreed to alliance. For the Nords, it meant setting aside generations of animosity toward the Dunmer. For the Dunmer, it meant accepting help from the people who had invaded their homeland multiple times. For the Argonians, it meant political recognition. Jorunn became the leader of the pact, earning the title Skald King for his leadership and for the songs he composed about Nordic heroes. Under his rule, Eastern Skyrim participated in the Three Banners War, fighting against the Daggerfall Covenant and the Aldmeri Dominion for control of Cyrodiil and the Ruby Throne. Eastern Skyrim in ESO showed traditional Nordic culture. You visited Windhelm in its glory, saw how the city functioned hundreds of years before the Civil War, you experienced Nordic holidays and festivals. You met Jarls and their courts functioning according to ancient traditions. The Nords of Eastern Skyrim took their alliance seriously despite historical tensions. They fought alongside Dunmer and Argonians, recognizing that unity made them stronger. This pragmatism coexisted with their traditionalism. Western Skyrim took a different path. High King Svargrim, who ruled Western Skyrim during the Three Banners War, refused to join any alliance. He saw the war as pointless and wanted no part in it. Svargrim was deeply isolationist. He didn't trust the other kingdoms of Skyrim, didn't trust the alliances forming across Tamriel, didn't trust outsiders at all. His attitude was that Western Skyrim should focus on its own affairs and let the rest of the world sort itself out. This isolationism extended to his treatment of foreigners. Non-Nords visiting Western Skyrim faced suspicion and hostility. Even Nords from Eastern Skyrim weren't entirely welcome. Svargrim's court was insular, focused purely on maintaining power within their territory. The Greymoor chapter of ESO, set in Western Skyrim, explored this isolated kingdom in detail. You could visit Solitude in the Second Era, explore the holds of Hafingar, Hjalmarch, and Karthold. The region faced threats from vampire covens and harrow storms, supernatural disasters that drained life from everything nearby. The Nords of Western Skyrim were described as being generally fair-skinned and strong, with enthusiasm for physicality that helped them survive harsh winters. They valued family structures to the point where it reflected in their political hierarchy. Jarls were clan leaders, fathers and mothers to their subjects. They enjoyed tales and legends, songs, and feasts with drinking. In many ways, they embodied stereotypical Nordic culture. But they were also more open to Imperial influence than their Eastern cousins, creating a hybrid culture that blended Nordic tradition with cosmopolitan elements. The main storyline of Greymoor involved stopping a vampire lord's plan and dealing with the Harrow Storm threat. It showed how Western Skyrim's isolation made them vulnerable to threats they didn't recognize until too late. ESO's version of Blackreach, called Blackreach Greymoor Caverns, was a massive underground realm beneath Western Skyrim. Unlike Skyrim's Blackreach, which was primarily Dwemer ruins, ESO's version mixed Dwemer architecture with other elements and showed how various groups had used the space over time. The caverns connected to the surface through great lifts scattered across Western Skyrim. These underground spaces held secrets about Nordic history, ancient battles, and the connection between surface Skyrim and the world below. Exploring Blackreach in ESO revealed layers of history. Dwemer ruins showed the ancient presence of the Deep Elves. Nordic structures indicated that ancient Nords had also used these caverns. Falmer presence hinted at the fate of the Snow Elves. All of this history layered together in one vast underground realm. The dragon cult had also operated in parts of Blackreach. You could find evidence of their presence, their architecture, their rituals. This connected to surface locations like Labyrinthian, which in ESO was still an active, if dangerous site, rather than the complete ruin it became by Skyrim's time. ESO showed Nordic culture from angles the other games couldn't. The split between Eastern and Western Skyrim demonstrated that Nords weren't monolithic. They had genuine philosophical differences about how to live, how to govern, how to interact with the wider world. The game featured numerous Nord characters with distinct personalities. Jorunn the Skald King was a poet-warrior who led through charisma and inspiration. Lyris Titanborn was a massive Nord woman, a member of the Five Companions who helped the player in the main questline. Tane Mera Stormcloak, an ancestor of Ulfric, showed the Stormcloak family's long history. Nordic festivals and traditions appeared throughout ESO. The New Life Festival celebrated the turning of the year with various activities reflecting different cultural traditions across Tamriel, including Nordic customs. The Witches' Festival incorporated Nordic folklore about spirits and the supernatural. The game explored Nordic relationships with other races in more depth than single-player games could. You saw Nords working with Dunmer in the Ebonheart Pact, setting aside old hatred for practical alliance. You saw Nords dealing with Imperial influence in Western Skyrim. You saw individual Nords making choices that went against their cultural expectations. Nord players in ESO got unique dialogue options and responses based on their race. NPCs reacted differently to Nord characters depending on location and context. In Eastern Skyrim, Nords were respected as allies. In Western Skyrim, they might still face suspicion if they were outsiders. In enemy territories, Nords faced the stereotypes other cultures held about them. The game reinforced Nordic warrior culture mechanically. Many Nord-themed item sets focused on physical combat, frost damage, or abilities that triggered from melee attacks. The aesthetic of Nordic gear maintained the rough, practical style established in Skyrim, but shown during an earlier historical period. Over its years of updates, ESO has continued adding Nordic content beyond the initial Eastern Skyrim zones and the Greymoor chapter. The game has featured Nordic characters in various storylines, referenced Nordic history in quests across Tamriel, and explored how Nordic culture influenced other regions. The Drakengard content tied back to Nordic connections with dragons and the Thuum. The organization that would eventually become the Blades had Nordic roots, and ESO explored those connections. Solstheim appeared in ESO content as well, showing the island during a period when it was still primarily Nordic, before Dunmer refugees settled there after Red Mountain's eruption. This let players see what Solstheim was like when Nordic culture dominated. Various Daedric Prince questlines involved Nordic characters or touched on Nordic interactions with Daedra. These showed that despite cultural wariness of Daedra worship, individual Nords throughout history had served or been affected by Daedric princes. Elder Scrolls Legends, the now discontinued card game, offered another perspective on Nords through its gameplay mechanics and card designs. In Legends, Nords were primarily associated with the strength and willpower attributes, shown as red and yellow cards. This matched their warrior nature and their strong moral code. Nord cards could be used in decks built around the Crusader class, which combined those two attributes. The racial theme for Nords in Legends was breaking runes. Runes in the game represented a player's health threshold, and breaking them triggered effects. Nord cards often gained bonuses when opponent runes broke, rewarding aggressive play. This mechanical expression of Nord culture emphasized their preference for direct confrontation and relentless assault. The Heroes of Skyrim expansion in 2017 added 154 new cards themed around Skyrim. This included dragon cards, shout actions, and companion cards with beast form abilities that let them transform into werewolves. Nord characters from Skyrim appeared as cards. Ulfric Stormcloak, General Tullius, the companions like Isla, the Huntress, and various other recognizable figures became playable cards with abilities reflecting their characteristics from the game. Shout cards worked thematically, like they did in Skyrim. When you played a shout, other copies of that shout in your deck upgraded to more powerful versions. Unrelenting Force could unsummon weak creatures initially, but if you upgraded it to maximum power, it could clear an entire lane of enemy creatures. Nordic locations became playable too. The Skyforge provided buffs to other cards. Whiterun gave defensive benefits. Locations from across Skyrim became part of deck strategies. The card art showcased Nordic culture visually. Warriors in traditional armor, mead halls, snowy landscapes, dragons circling overhead. The aesthetic perfectly captured the feel of Skyrim in card form. While Legends is no longer actively supported, it represented an interesting interpretation of how Nordic culture and abilities could translate into card game mechanics. The focus on aggression, the rewards for direct combat, the transformation mechanics for werewolves, all of these reflected aspects of Nord identity. Elder Scrolls, Blades, the mobile game released in 2019, featured Nordic content as part of its setting. While the game could take place in various locations, much of its aesthetic drew from Nordic influences, and Nord characters and enemies appeared throughout. Blades let players create characters of any race including Nord. Playing as a Nord gave you racial bonuses similar to other games, resistance to frost, bonuses to physical combat abilities. The game's town-building mechanics let you construct Nordic-style buildings and decorations. The architecture followed the established Elder Scrolls Nordic aesthetic, with timber and stone construction, peaked roofs, and carved details. The Abyss mode, an endless dungeon crawler, often featured Nordic ruins as settings. You'd fight through burrows filled with Draugr, encountering the same architectural style and enemies from Skyrim, but rendered for mobile platforms. While Blades wasn't specifically about Nordic culture, it showed how pervasive the Nordic aesthetic had become in Elder Scrolls. The visual language established in Skyrim had become so iconic that it appeared across different genres and platforms. Beyond just the Elder Scrolls series, the Nords and Skyrim's popularity influenced broader gaming culture. The arrow in the knee guard dialogue became one of gaming's most famous memes. The Fus Ro Da shout became instantly recognizable even to people who never played the game. Skyrim's success brought Nordic-inspired fantasy into the mainstream. Other games and media started incorporating more Norse-inspired elements, moving beyond the typical medieval European fantasy that had dominated the genre. The idea of magic through spoken language, the Thuum system, inspired similar mechanics in other games. The portrayal of Nords as complex, morally gray, politically divided people rather than simple barbarians influenced how fantasy games approached human cultures. The Civil War questline showed that good people could disagree fundamentally about important issues, a nuance not always present in fantasy games. The modding community's embrace of Skyrim led to countless expansions and reinterpretations of Nordic culture. Mods added new Nordic armor sets, expanded Nordic lore, created new Nord-focused questlines, and deepened the cultural details. Some mods even addressed criticisms of how Bethesda portrayed certain aspects of Nordic culture. Cosplayers recreated Nordic armor and weapons from Skyrim, bringing the culture into real-world fan events. Nordic food became a thing among fans, with people creating real recipes for mead, Nordic dishes mentioned in the games, sweet rolls. The culture leaked into reality through fan engagement. The Nords have been analyzed academically as examples of how games portray culture, handle moral complexity, and adapt real-world inspiration into fantasy settings. Scholars have written about how Bethesda adapted Norse mythology and Viking culture while creating something distinct. Papers have examined the parallels and divergences, discussing what the changes say about modern fantasy's relationship with historical cultures. The Civil War in Skyrim has been analyzed as a case study in morally gray storytelling. Unlike many games where factions are clearly good or evil, both sides of the Civil War have legitimate points and significant flaws. This ambiguity generated substantial discussion about how games handle political conflict. The portrayal of racism in Skyrim, particularly in Windhelm, has been examined for both its strengths and weaknesses. Some critics praised Bethesda for including it and not sanitizing Nordic society. Others argued the game didn't go far enough in addressing or condemning it. These discussions reflected broader conversations about how games should handle difficult social issues. The religious aspects of Nordic culture, particularly the Talos worship and its ban, have been analyzed as commentary on religious freedom, cultural identity, and political power. The White Gold Concordate's prohibition of Talos worship resonated with real-world religious conflicts. The Way of the Voice and the Greybeards have been discussed as representations of monastic philosophy and the tension between power and restraint. The choice between using the Thuum as a weapon or reserving it for meditation reflected real philosophical debates about technology, power, and responsibility. The Elder Scrolls fan community has generated massive amounts of Nordic-themed content. Fanfiction explores Nordic characters, creates new stories set in Skyrim, and expands on lore mentioned briefly in the games. Fan artists have created thousands of pieces depicting Nordic scenes, characters, and moments from the games. These range from realistic portraits of favorite characters to stylized interpretations of Nordic mythology, from comic strips about Nord adventures to elaborate paintings of Skyrim's landscapes. Music covers of Skyrim's soundtrack, particularly songs like Dragonborn and the Song of the Dragonborn, became popular. Fans recorded themselves singing in the dragon language, created full orchestral arrangements, even made versions featuring traditional Nordic instruments like the Tagelharpa. YouTube is filled with Nord-related content. Let's Plays focusing on Nord characters, lore analysis videos diving deep into Nordic history, challenge runs with specific Nord builds, machinima using Skyrim's engine to tell Nordic stories. The variety is enormous. Tabletop role-playing content inspired by the Nords has flourished. People have created campaigns set in Skyrim, stat blocks for using Nord characters in various RPG systems, entire supplements expanding on Nordic culture for use in their own fantasy worlds. The Elder Scrolls community on Reddit, various forums, and Discord servers constantly discusses Nordic lore, debates aspects of Nord culture, and shares discoveries about Nordic content in the games. These communities have collectively cataloged massive amounts of information about the Nords that might otherwise go unnoticed. The Nords represent something central to the Elder Scrolls series: the complexity of human cultures and the consequences of history. They're survivors who came from a dying continent and built a new homeland through violence and conquest. They're heroes who overthrew dragon tyrants and villains who committed genocide against the Snow Elves. They're traditionalists clinging to old ways and progressives adapting to new realities. They're victims of religious persecution and perpetrators of racial discrimination. This complexity makes them feel real. The Nords aren't monolithic good guys or bad guys. They're people with a long history, cultural values that can be both admirable and problematic, and genuine philosophical differences about how to live. The Nord story is about heritage and identity. What does it mean to be Nord? Is it about bloodline, culture, values, or something else? Different characters answer this differently. Some say being Nord means maintaining traditions. Others say it means adapting while keeping core values. Still others define it through action rather than birth. The tension between tradition and progress runs through Nordic culture. This mirrors real-world debates in many societies. Do you preserve the past even when it holds you back? Do you embrace change even when it means losing your identity? The Nords struggle with these questions constantly. Their relationship with power is complicated. The Thuum is ultimate power, literal reality warping magic in your voice. The Way of the Voice says this power should be used for worship, not warfare. But when dragons return, when your homeland is threatened, how can you not use every weapon available? This question extends beyond the voice. Ulfric had power and used it to kill Thorig. The Empire had power and bowed to Talmor demands. Power without wisdom leads to tyranny, but wisdom without power leads to subjugation. The Nords grapple with this constantly. Looking at how Nords are portrayed across Arena, Daggerfall, Morrowind, Oblivion, Skyrim, ESO, Legends, and Blades reveals an evolution in both technology and storytelling. Early games gave us stat blocks with brief descriptions. Nords were strong, frost-resistant warriors. That was enough when games couldn't support deeper characterization. As technology improved, so did cultural depth. Morrowind added books, history, and the Skull. Oblivion showed Nords as integrated Imperial citizens. Then, Skyrim exploded everything, giving us a fully realized Nordic culture with all its beauty and ugliness. ESO went back in time to show Nords during a different historical period, revealing how their culture had changed over centuries. The split between Eastern and Western Skyrim showed that Nordic society was never monolithic. Legends translated culture into gameplay mechanics. The aggressive playstyle, the focus on breaking through enemy defenses, the transformation mechanics all reflected Nordic cultural values through card game design. Each medium brought different strengths. Single-player games could tell focused stories and create atmospheric moments. MMO content could show broader social dynamics and longer historical arcs. Card games could make cultural values into mechanical systems. The consistency across these different portrayals is impressive. Despite being created by different teams using different engines for different platforms, the Nords maintain a coherent cultural identity. You can see the same core values, aesthetic choices, and historical themes across every game. After examining the Nords across decades of games, what actually makes them work as a fictional culture? First, they're understandable. The values they hold, honor, bravery, community, family, these are universal concepts. Even when Nord culture becomes extreme or problematic, we can understand where it comes from. Second, they're conflicted. The best parts of Nordic culture, loyalty, strength, tradition, can become the worst parts when taken too far. This internal contradiction makes them interesting. There's no simple answer to what being a good Nord means. Third, they have genuine history. The journey from Atmoran refugees to conquerors to empire builders to divided provincials feels like actual historical development. Events have consequences that ripple through generations. The Night of Tears shaped everything that came after. Fourth, they change. The Nords of Arena aren't identical to the Nords of Skyrim, even within the game's fiction. Culture evolves. The development of the Way of the Voice, the integration into the Empire, the Civil War, these represent real cultural shifts over time. Fifth, they're not perfect. Bethesda doesn't sanitize Nordic culture or pretend its problems don't exist. The racism, the anti-intellectualism, the stubborn refusal to adapt, these flaws make the culture feel authentic. Perfect cultures are boring. Sixth, individuals vary. Not every Nord fits this stereotype. You meet Nord mages, Nord scholars, Nord merchants, Nord pacifists. The culture provides a context, but individuals make their own choices within and sometimes against that context. Seventh, they have style. The aesthetic of Nordic culture is distinctive and appealing. The architecture, the armor, the weapons, the music, the language, it all creates a cohesive visual and audio identity that's instantly recognizable. The future of the Nords in Elder Scrolls. Where do the Nords go from here? Elder Scrolls 6 hasn't been released yet, and we don't know much about it beyond that it's being developed. Will it continue the Nordic story? Some loose threads remain from Skyrim. The Civil War ended, but the underlying issues didn't. Whether the Stormcloaks won or the Empire won, Skyrim still faces the Talmor threat. That conflict will eventually come to a head. The dragons are dealt with, but not gone. Paarthurnax and other dragons still exist. How will they integrate into or conflict with Nordic society going forward? The relationship between dragons and humans defined Merethic and early First Era history. Will it become important again? The Thuum's place in Nordic culture is uncertain. The Dragonborn proved the voice could be used in combat again. Will more Nords start learning shouts for warfare? Will the Way of the Voice adapt, or will the Greybeards remain isolated on their mountain? The religious situation remains unresolved. Talos worship might be officially banned, but Nords haven't stopped believing. How will this play out when the Empire eventually confronts the Aldmeri Dominion again? The Snow Elves, through Knight Paladin Gelebor, represent a thread that could be explored. The last uncorrupted snow elf exists. What happens to him? Does he try to restore his people? Do the Nords feel any responsibility for what their ancestors did? Whatever Elder Scrolls 6 brings, the Nords will likely remain important to the series. They're too central to Tamriel's history, too popular with fans, too tied into major storylines to simply disappear. Final thoughts. The Nords' place in fantasy. The Nords stand as one of gaming's most fully realized fictional cultures. From rough beginnings as basic barbarian race to the complex, conflicted people we see in modern games, they've evolved alongside the Elder Scrolls series itself. They show what's possible when developers commit to cultural depth. It's not enough to just give a race some stat bonuses and call it a culture. The Nords have history, religion, art, music, cuisine, fashion, architecture, language, philosophy, politics, all the elements of real cultures rendered in fantasy form. They prove that inspiration from real-world cultures can create something new and interesting without being simple copies. The Nords aren't just Vikings, they're a distinct culture that draws from Norse tradition while being their own thing. They demonstrate that moral complexity makes stories better. The Civil War works because both sides have points. The treatment of the Snow Elves is tragic because we understand both why it happened and how wrong it was. The Talos ban controversy resonates because it touches on real questions about faith and power. Most importantly, they feel alive. When you walk through Whiterun or Windhelm, when you talk to Nord NPCs, when you participate in their festivals and rituals and conflicts, it feels like you're experiencing a living culture rather than just a game mechanic. The Nords have become more than just content in video games. They're a cultural touchstone for Elder Scrolls fans, a reference point for fantasy world building, and proof that games can create cultures as rich and complex as those in literature or film. Whether you've played as a Nord warrior charging into battle, a Nord mage defying cultural expectations, or another race exploring Skyrim as an outsider, the Nords have left their mark. Their story, from refugees fleeing a dying continent to becoming one of Tamriel's most influential peoples, is one of the great narratives in gaming. And that's the full story of the Nords. From ancient Atmora to modern Skyrim, from Arena to Iso, from the heights of Sovngarde to the depths of Blackreach, we've covered their origins, their culture, their evolution, and their impact. These people of ice and iron, these children of the sky, these builders of empires and slayers of dragons, continue to be one of the most fascinating aspects of the Elder Scrolls universe. So next time you're walking through Skyrim, take a moment to appreciate the depth behind what you're experiencing. Every mead hall has history. Every ruin has a story. Every Nord you meet is part of a culture thousands of years old, shaped by triumph and tragedy, tradition and change. That's the beauty of what Bethesda created, and that's why the Nords continue to capture our imagination decades after they first appeared.